Lost some latitude. I should have asked people. Good evening. Today we're learning Daf Kav Ches, and we're also going to do Chav Tes. It moves pretty quickly. This will put us a blot ahead. And then on Friday, what? We're on Kav Ches Amud Aleph at the Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down. We'll learn all of Kav Ches and Chav Tes until about 2/3 of the way down as well. And then tomorrow is Thursday. We're going to learn one blot. Friday, we're going to learn one blot in the morning. Shabbos, we'll learn Sunday's blot and then nothing on Sunday. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And I don't know what I'm going to do for Shabbos. It's all going to be recorded and posted in advance. As I will be in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, here we go. 2/3 of the way down. Fascinating question. All right, now I'm 15 years old. I remember something from when I was 12 years old. Does that count as edus? My memories of when I was a child, is that edus? How does that work? So says the Gemara, yes, ne'emanin. However, you're not ne'eman for everything. Let's see what you are ne'eman for, and then we'll see what you're not ne'eman for. Ne'eman adam lomar zek sav yado shel abba. I recognize my father's handwriting. My father has very distinct handwriting. I could see it from a mile away. My mother too. V'zek sav yado shel Rebbe, if one recognizes their Rebbe's handwriting. V'zek sav yado shel achi, or my brother. Now, here, obviously, we're going to have to ask why we need all three of these. What's the difference? We'll ask that in the Gemara. A person can also say, Zechor ha'isi beploni shiyasa behinuma v'rosha parua. My daughter made a comment today in the car, Taka. I saw so-and-so. They weren't dressing in accordance with Jewish law. Now, my daughter's a katana. She's 11 years old. So if she's a gedola and then she says, I saw this person without a sheitel, maybe they're not married. So that's edus. That's edus, says the Gemara. She can't say it now because she's a katana. But once she hits her bas mitzvah and she reflects on the past, that's allowed. This kid can say, I remember when I was in elementary school, they pulled this kid out of class to stick him in the mikvah so he could eat truma. Therefore, reverse inference, he must be a Kohen. I remember I saw when we were down at the granary getting food as Kohanim, I saw this guy there. He's also a Kohen. He can reflect on his childhood and say, this place is a Beis HaPras, which is where, as we've learned many times in Shas, where there was a concern about bones of a human being there, where a Kohen might become Tameh. The Ad Kan Hainu Bayin B'Shabbos. We knew our upper limits of how far we could walk for Tchum Shabbos or for an Eruv. That would be Ne'eman as well. And that's Lamaisa here in Chicago. Let's say that a child says when he's 13 years old, I remember last year when I was 12, I could only go up to here. We trust that child. That's Ne'eman. Even though the testimony is while he's a Gadol, from a time and experience that was before he was a Gadol, Afal Pikim, we still trust him. Now, all of that is the good stuff. What do we not trust a child for? The Gemara says, I shouldn't say we don't trust a child. What do we not trust the adult to recall from when he was a child? This was a particular person's place. Ma'amad umoshav, this person had a particular position. Rashi cheats for us and tells us what's going on because it's case scenarios that affect people's mumminess. Okay, so we'll get to that in the Gemara. When is it that we say that we trust this adult as he reflects on his childhood? That is if there is a gadol who is with him. V'tzricha, why did we have all of the cases of the signatures, the father, the Rebbe, and the brother? Diashmin and Aviv, if we would have only had the case of the father's signature, yeah, we understand why you would know your father's signature. You live in the same exact house. Aval Rabo lo, but because you don't live in the same house as your Rebbe, maybe then we would assume that a person might not really know the handwriting well enough. V'yashmun and Rabo, if we said that, okay, we understand why you need the father and the Rebbe, mishum the islay aimsa the Rabbi aval aviv lo, the level of yira that a person has for his Rebbe is often greater than that for his father. V'yashmun and hanitarte, and if I would have had both of these, then I might have thought aviv d'shliach kabe v'Rabo de isla aimsa. In regards to my father, I see him all the time. In regards to my Rebbe, I have a lot of fear for him, so I'm always going to be very conscientious about his handwriting. Aval achiv de lesle I might have thought that by a brother that I wouldn't be trusted with his handwriting. How often do I look at my brother's handwriting? At least this is what the Gemara is assuming, and I certainly don't fear my brothers. Therefore, Kamash Malan, Kevan de Kiyum Shtaros Midrabanan, Hemnu Rabbanan Midrabanan. Since verifying a shtar is Midrabanan, therefore the rabbis trusted us with Dine Dirabanan. Good. 5 lines from the bottom, Kav Ches Amud Aleph. Zachor Haisi Beploni Shiyatz Binuma Barosh Parua. We said that this 15-year-old can reflect on his childhood, saying, I know that this woman wasn't dressed properly. My time. What is the reason why this is the case? After all, remember what Rashi had foreshadowed for us, that we were concerned that a child is not allowed to give edus. An adult cannot give edus from his childhood if there's a financial impact. Doesn't this have a financial impact? It can change the ksuba. If a woman is yotzes behinuma, she's wearing clothing that reflects the fact that she's not married, so doesn't that edus mean that her ksuba is 200? So says the Gemara, my time, why is it that we trust this adult to reflect on his childhood in a way that's accurate? After all, there's money involved. Says the Gemara, Kavan the rov nashim besulos nisos, since when most women get married, they are besulos, there's a rov in play. And because there's a rov in play, therefore, gilui milsa be'almahu, this edus that the 15-year-old is giving from when he saw a woman when he was 12, to say that she was dressed like a basula would be dressed, that's only a gilui milsa be'alma. It's not really edus. It's not really edus. It's just a gilui milsa. 3 lines from the bottom, we had said v'shahaya ish ploni. We said, I remember when I was in 5th grade, the Schwartzes, they always got pulled out and they always got thrown into the mikvah, and then they would eat some truma. The Dilma Eved Kohen. Why is it that our Mishnah doesn't include the possibility that it's an Eved Kohen, not just the Kohen, but maybe the Eved of a Kohen? Says the Gemara, by virtue of the fact that it was omitted from our Mishnah, that's Misayeh the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. What does Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi say? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Asr la'adam Sheyilamed Abdo Torah. It's usher for a person to teach his child Torah. That's why the Eved wasn't included in our Mishnah, because you're remembering a case scenario where a kid was pulled out of school. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi doesn't allow for that. You're not allowed to teach an Eved. You can only teach a proper Kohen. That's why this case wasn't included in our Mishnah. Asks the Gemara below, we don't allow the Eved to learn Torah. After all, we have the following brisa, Tanya. Lo vehemenu rabo, if the Eved borrows money from his master, o she'aso rabo apotropos, top of Kaf Chesed Beis, or if the master made him into an apotropos, a guard of some kind, o shehiniach tefillin bifnei rabo, or he puts on tefillin in front of his Rabbi, o shekara shlosha psukim beveis hakneses, we see the Eved is learning Torah. So then under all of these circumstances, forgetting the context because it's not really relevant, we see in this Mishnah, in this brisa, I should say, it's a brisa, right? Yeah, we see in this brisa that an Eved does learn Torah. So how can Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi say that an Eved doesn't learn Torah? Says the Gemara, Hasam, in that case where he's reading the 3 psukim, that's the Ikri Eved Midaito. He did that on his own. However, Kika Amrinan, when we said that our Mishnah, where we excluded the Eved and we said it's like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that's the Kanai be Minagbanim. We don't treat him like our kids. If you're a Kohen, you don't treat the Eved like he's not allowed to go to yeshiva. We don't send the Eved of a Kohen to yeshiva. He's not the same as a Kohen. He's an Eved. So therefore, our Mishnah is like the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that we omitted the case of Eved because an Eved is not allowed to learn Torah. Fine. Litbo lechel betruma, we said that a person can do tevila, that this child, it would be a Kohen, he can go to the mikvah. What case are we talking about? Only betruma derabanan. We must be talking about truma derabanan, but we wouldn't allow this 15-year-old to say, when I was 12, my friend was pulled out. We wouldn't trust him enough in regards to truma doraisa, only truma derabanan. That this family, this child, the Kohen who's 12, he's reflecting back on when he was 12. He's like, I remember the Schwartzes, they were down by the granary as well. The Dilma Eved Kohen, why here do we exclude Eved Kohen? After all, here, an Eved is definitely allowed to collect on behalf of his master. Says the Gemara, it's not. It must be that our Mishnah is command Amar Ein Cholken Truma LeEved Elim Ken Rabo Imo. We must be talking about a case where we're following the Shita and the Tanaim, that yes, an Eved can collect at the granary, at the Beis HaGranos, but only if his master is with him. What is the source for this? Tanya, we have a brisa. This brisa is talking about an Eved who's a Safek Eved, Safek Kohen, a unique case. And on that we have the following machlokes. The Tanakama is Rabbi Huda, and that's our Mishnah. In Cholken Truma LeEved Elim Ken Rabo Imoti, Rabbi Huda, exactly like we just said. However, there is a dissenting opinion, and we're going to learn the rest of the brisa too. Rabbi Yossi Omer Yachol Hu Sheyomar Im Kohen Anitznu B'Shvil Atzmi. He could. Rabbi Yossi says this Safek Eved, Safek Kohen has a chakira to make. If I'm a Kohen, then give me for me. And if I'm only the Eved of, then give me Tnuli B'Shvil Rabbi. Okay, so that's why he doesn't agree with the Shita of Rabbi Huda, and he allows the Eved to collect even without his master. So our Mishnah obviously is like the opinion of Rabbi Huda, who only allows the Eved to collect food from the granary with his master. In the place of Rabbi Huda, because an Eved was never allowed to collect on his own. When someone was collecting on their own, that implied that they were a Kohen proper. So therefore, we could make the assumption that if a person was collecting food at the granary, that they're taka a real Kohen. But in the place of Rabbi Yossi, because we would allow for an Evet to collect, because there was a safek, either he was a Kohen he should collect, or he was an Evet that could collect on behalf of his master. Either way, therefore, Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that we do not extrapolate from one's collection of truma, at the granary, to the fact that he's a Kohen miyuchas. And then a brisa plays this out a little bit. Tanya. We're a third of the way down on Kaf Chesamid Beis, heading to the end of the parak. Amar Rebbe Lazar b'Rebbe Yossi, Yomai lo he'adti. Rebbe Lazar says, I never gave testimony. And then it says, Pamachas he'adti. Obviously, it's hyperbolic language. It doesn't mean never. It just means, I never give testimony. I mean, I gave one time. That's kind of the tone of the writing here. So he says, I never gave testimony. But one time when I was giving testimony, they made an Eved into a Kohen based on my word, and it was a mistake. Says the Gemara, you think that a Kadosh Baruch Hu would let this error ever happen? Rashi highlights the story about Reb Pinchas ben Yair, that his donkey couldn't do anything wrong. He wouldn't even eat food that was untied. If a donkey wouldn't be led astray, the donkey of a tzaddik wouldn't be led astray to violate halacha. Tzaddikim atzmam lo kol sheken Rebbe Lazar was a tzaddik. So there's no possible way that they inadvertently made an Eved into a Kohen because of some mistake that Rebbe Lazar made. That's ridiculous. Ella says the Gemara, Bikshu lahalos Eved. They started the process. They're like, oh, according to Rabbi Lazar, who gave it, just maybe this Eved really is a Kohen. It didn't end up happening, but they started talking about it. Chaza ve'asrei to Rabbi Yossi, ve'azil ve'asid ve'asrei to Rabbi Yehuda. And what was the case? It was a case where they saw a Kohen getting food in the location of Rabbi Yossi. And if you'll recall, Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that ein ma'alen mitruma liyuchsin, that we don't infer that the person who's collecting is by definition a Kohen miyuchas. So if a person collects in Asrei de Rabbi Yossi, and the testimony was given by Asrei de Rabbi Yehuda, that's very confusing. So that was the case that we were talking about with Rebbe Lazar. Somebody saw, let's say, Ploni Almoni collecting in a place of Rabbi Yossi, but he was a Rabbi Yehuda Jew. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's Ma'alan Mitrum L'Yuchsim. We should assume he's a Kohen. Says the Gemara, you can't do that. You can't do that. That brings us to the two dots halfway down on Kaf Ches Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, why is it that we trust him in regards to a Beis HaPras? Why do we trust a 15-year-old who is reflecting on his time as a child that this field is a Beis HaPras? Because Beis HaPras derabanan, that field is only going to be treated betuma derabanan if a Kohen goes through there without being careful. A person who is a Kohen can walk through a Beis HaPras. He should just blow the dirt in front of him as he steps to make sure that there are no bones protruding from the ground. And if a Beis HaPras was plowed, then for sure it's tahor. So obviously the whole field is only going to be a concern midrabanan at worst. My time. Why is it that a Beis HaPras that was plowed is considered tahor? Because it certainly was going to be trampled to the point that any bone that's there is so small that it cannot cause for tumah. Next, 2-3 lines before the middle width lines. V'adkan hainu boin b'Shabbos, the end of the Tchum Shabbos, kasavar tchumen derabanan. A beautiful diuk from the Gemara that it must be we're dealing with the shita that tchumen are derabanan. This comes up lamaisa when people are you have to get in a taxi on Shabbos to go somewhere. It comes up. Poskim discuss this in regards to opening packages on Shabbos. If the package came from outside the tchum, so that's a big problem. So most of our packages that we get, unless you're ordering something specialty, let's say you order something locally from Amazon, Lamaisa, it's probably coming from the place on Howard. So that for them to come on Shabbos, that's not a tchum violation. That's nothing. That's nothing. In theory, they could have walked it to our house. We all live so close. It doesn't mean it's mutter to open packages on Shabbos. That's a shaila in the poskim. There are times when we're mekil. There are times when we're machmir. And please ask your local Orthodox rabbi. But one of the things that are factored in regards to packages being opened is whether or not the package was carried by a goy outside of a tchum Shabbos, which would be an Isser D'Rabbanan. It shouldn't be umispaid. Our Mishnah highlighted cases where we don't trust the 15-year-old who is now a gadol to reflect on his time as a child. Why didn't we allow him to give testimony in these cases? Says the Gemara, first of the middle with lines, because my taima afuke mamona lo mafkinan. We don't allow this 15-year-old to give testimony from moments of his childhood which generate the extraction of funds from other people. That's not right. That's not right. We have a higher, let's just say it in our parlance, the burden of proof that we need it has to be stronger than that. You have to have edus as a gadol from something that happened when you're a gadol, not edus from something when you were a katan. Tanu Rabbana, ne'eman hatinok lomar kach amar li abba. When it says ne'eman hatinok, Rashi explains it's actually our case in our Mishnah. Ne'eman, a gadol, from when something happened when he's a tinok, to say, he can say, when I was 12, my father told me, mishpacha zu tahora, mishpacha zu tmeya. So says the Gemara, let's say that when I was 10, my father said to me, the neighbors to the west, they're tmeim. So first, the Gemara is bothered by the language. We're going to be metame a whole family. Tahora utmeya sal kadaitach. Says the Gemara, you're right. That isn't the correct language. Ela mishpacha zu ksheru, mishpacha zu psula. This is in regards to yichus, not in regards to actual tuma status. That's of course not the case. We're not metame whole families at once. That's, you want to say they're all mitzvah, right? Okay, that's possible, but just off the cuff to just hear as a child that family is a bunch of tmeim. That's not a normal comment. So the Gemara says you're right. We're talking about yichus. Fine. The Brisa continues. We ate a special meal called a ktsatsa. We're going to learn about what this meal is at the end of the page, called ktsatsa shel beis ploni. When we see this meal, then we can trust that it happened, even if the edus is given by a 15-year-old from when he was a child. And as well, he can recall from his childhood that they would give challah, they would give the percentage, a small percentage of the challah of the dough to a kohen, and matanos as well, the animal parts that they would give to a kohen. That too, a person who's a gadol can reflect from his childhood and say, I remember these things. However, only al yadei atzmo, he can only reflect on him saying about himself, we are not kohanim. We gave our hafrashas challah to a kohen. We gave the animal parts to the kohen. Only if he did it himself. Avalo al yedei acher. He can't say, when I was a child, my father told me that my neighbors gave the kohen challah. That doesn't count. Too indirect. We don't trust. We don't trust anyone to say that. And then, thank you. V'chulan, 5 lines into the wide lines. Everyone agrees that if the child was an oved kochavim and he converted, or eved v'nishtacher, ein ne'eman. We don't trust testimony. Now you're from, let's say you converted the day before your bar mitzvah. And now you're a from Ben Torah and you're 14. You want to remember from when you were 12 and a goy? No dice. 12 when you were an eved? Also no dice. That doesn't work. You have to be, when we allow a person to rely on his memory bank from his childhood, that's only under the narrow circumstances that you were actually Jewish. And now to the line that I had apparently skipped, 2. As we saw in our Mishnah, similarly quoted here in this brisa, that we don't trust a child when there's a case of extraction of money, and then difficult to understand, which the Gemara is going to analyze. Rav Yochanan ben Baroka Omer Ne'eman, and we do trust them. It's just a little hard to know what he's talking about because we just quoted 4 cases in the brisa. Which one was he talking about? The Gemara says Rav Yochanan ben Baroka Ahayo. Which part of this was he talking about? If you want to say it's the last case of the brisa where we said that he's ne'eman, that he's not ne'eman to say that ploni b'makom hazeh ma'imad, that this guy had a job over here, u'mispeit hayel ploni b'makom hazeh, this guy was a professional eulogizer. That can't be. It can't be that Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka would have said that they're ne'eman there because afuke mamonahu. That's a case where we're ruining someone's parnasa or changing their finances. It must be aresha. It must be talking about an earlier part of that brisa. Which part of the brisa was Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka going lenient on? Says the Gemara, and somewhat shockingly, v'chulam im haya oved kochavim v'nisgayer eved v'nishtacher ein ne'emanin. On that, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka omer ne'emanin. Wow, who would have ever thought? Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, is that his name? Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka was of the opinion that if a child was 12 and a goy, and then he converts and becomes a gadol, that now that he's a gadol and a yid, he can reflect back on his time not only as a child, but even when he was a goy as a child. And that's considered to be valid edus. That's fascinating. B'mai kamiflage, last of the middle width lines. What's this machlokes all about? Why is it that some of the Tanaim trust a 15-year-old to reflect on his childhood as a goy before he became a ger, or as an eved before he became nishtachrer? Why would we trust it? I understand you want to trust a yid. Okay, whatever. You're a katan. You don't really have das, but you're a yid. You're thinking in halachic terms, right? So at least my kids don't. My kids who are katanim, they don't have academic integrity, but they have memories. But they know what halacha is. My son said to me the other day, he's like, "Okay, Abba," I was speaking for Rabbi Garfinkel on Shabbos and for his chaver, they're not from. He's like, "Okay, but they know Hilchos Shabbos, right?" I'm like, "They don't know anything. They don't know an olive from a base. They don't know Shabbos from weekday. They barely know anything. Nothing." He couldn't even my son's like, "I don't know," because my son thinks like a frum kid. So I can understand. You want to trust a frum kid. I got it. But you want to trust a guy who's 12 and now that he's 15? It's crazy. But my kamiflage, says the Gemara, Tanakama Savar. The reason why the Tanakama forbade trusting this 15-year-old to remember his 12-year-old childhood is because Savar came and Dovet Kochavim, who have a dike. He doesn't even know how to think like a yid. He doesn't know anything in Shulchan Aruch. He doesn't know an olive from a base. He's a guy. He doesn't know anything. And says the Gemara, what about Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka? Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, the Mechuda Shita, he says, first long line, Savar came into daite le'igyure, because he probably had in mind that he was going to be converting. So he started to think like a yid. Yiddish shakat made the kavadak. He was paying attention. So here we now have three categories. We have the category of a 12-year-old who is a guy with no intention of converting. We for sure don't trust him, even according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Then we have the case of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, where he's 12. He's like, I really love Judaism. I'm going to convert. He's already thinking a little bit like a yid. Then when he's 15, we can trust him about his ages when he was 12, as he considered being a yid. And then there's the Chachamim who say, this is ridiculous. When you're a guy, you have no naamanus to look back. It doesn't work at all. Those are the three different approaches. Now, we had said that we trust a child to speak about a ktsatsa, a particular meal that was taking place. This is one of those things where you have to be a real kanoi to do this. We don't really do these things nowadays. My ktsatsa, says the Gemara to Tana Rabbanan. Ketzad ktsatsa, what is this type of ktsatsa, this meal? Echad min ha'achen, there's one brother, shenasa isha she'ena hogenesla. He married a woman who doesn't have good yichus. So bain b'nei mishpacha, the whole family comes around. Umevian chavis malei peros, they bring a huge barrel of fruit. V'shover no saba'em sarachava, they take a sledgehammer and they just crack open the barrel in the middle of the street. The Omrim, and they call out, Achenu Beis Yisrael, Shimu, my fellow brethren, everybody listen. Achenu Ploni, my brother so-and-so, Nasa Isha Sheina Hogeneslo. He married a girl, doesn't have good yichus. Umisyarein anu, we're afraid Shema Yisarev Zaro Bizarenu. Wow, this is very bad for family politics. We're afraid that he's going to have kids that are going to mix with our kids. It's not Yiddish kid. They're Jewish, but the yichus is bad. Bo chulachem dugma ledoros. Everybody come take an apple out of the barrel that I just broke in the middle of the street. So that everyone knows about my brother and his wife. You should not be hanging out with those kids. We believe that kid. This is one of those memories. It's hard to forget. What did you do when you were 12? Well, I remember when I was in the city square and my dad took a sledgehammer and cracked open a barrel of apples and made a big pronouncement about my brother. About my brother. Fun Thanksgiving that year. I think they went to the wife's family that year. I am just guessing. Hadron Allah Isha Shanis Armal Baruch Hashem. We finished another parak in Shas. We are trucking along. I think we're going to be close to 950 blot this week. I think while I'm out of town, it will be 950 blot. I think Shabbos is 945. Baruch Hashem, we finished yet another parak. You read, so we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Let us learn a little bit more. The new parak begins on the top of Chav Testament Aleph. Elunaros sheish lem knas. If a man has tashmish amita with any of the following na'aros, key languages na'aros. We know that there's katan, there's na'ar, there's bogeres. We'll get into some of these languages today. So elu na'aros sheish lem knas, that if there is tashmish amita, that there is going to be a knas, a punishment. Haba la mamzeres v'al nasina v'al akusis. One is with a mamzeres. That's pasuk in Chumash. Nasina is a machlokes Rashi Tosos. Rashi dibra maskal nasina 8 lines down says min hagivon v'yasur lekal. The David gazar land. That's a gezer derabanan. Tosfos on the left side, top Tosfos Gemara's third line. V'ein nir l'Rabbeinu tam. Dahamashma b'Gemara d'nesina havidoraisa. The Machlokas Rashi Tosfos who the nesinim were. Was it a group of people that was a gzeret derabanan from David, or was it din doraisa? We don't know, or I should say it's a Machlokas. And v'alakusis, that's a conversation too about what they are. If a person is intimate with a girl who converted, a girl who was held captive, or a shivcha, who respectively were freed, converted, or freed again, I guess in different ways, and had they been when they were in that scenario, and now they're older, then if a person was intimate with them, they get a knas. As well, all of these family members, a man who sleeps with his sister, with his father's sister, with his mother's sister, with his wife's sister, with his brother's sister, with his father's brother's sister, and with a nida, yesh lam knas. This should instantly trigger a question for us. We're familiar with a principle in Shas called kam le'v'derabba minei, that when you've done two things wrong, only the larger consequence is given. So what do you mean you slept with a nida and you're going to get a knas? That's very strange. Why that? We have a larger consequence to be given. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, last couple lines of the Mishnah here on Chav Testament Aleph, and many of these, if not all of these relationships, actually have an onesh kares. But since the onesh kares is a din min hashamayim, and it's not an onesh bezdin that's meted out here, ba'olam hazeh, ein ben misas bezdin, therefore we don't apply kam le'v'derabba minei, where we use the trump card of the larger consequences is applied, because the larger consequence is hashkafic, halachic, but it's not, you're not getting lashes, you're not getting a physical punishment. So therefore the knas applies here. Asks the Gemara a third of the way down at the open of the Gemara, Chav Testament, Hani naros psulos islu knas ksheras lo. What about a regular girl? You've given me every iteration of a woman you shouldn't be sleeping with. What about a regular girl? Says Gemara, of course. Hachi kamar. Elu naros, adding the word psulos, sheish lem knas. Obviously, and of course, obviously there'd be a knas as well for sleeping with a totally normal girl. Nara in Ketana lo. A Nara, yes, a Nara is a girl who's a little bit older, but a Ketana, she's tiny. She's a little kid. So there's no onus by a Ketana. There's no knas by a Ketana, says the Gemara. Mantana, who would be the author of our Mishnah if this is true? That would be Amar Yehuda Marav. That would be Rav Meir Hi Tanya. Ketana mi bas yom echad ve'at shetavi shtei se'aros yesh la mecher ve'in la knas. She can be sold as a shivcha, and she does not have a knas. From the time that she sees shtei se'aros until she becomes a bogeres, which is 12 and 6 months, yesh la knas ve'in la mecher divi Reb Meir. So Reb Meir is a perfect match for our Mishnah, which implies only a nara, but not a ketana. And Reb Meir continues, Shai Reb Meir Omer, Kol makom sheyesh mecher ein knas, v'chol makom sheyesh knas ein mecher. These have an inverse relationship. Whenever a girl can be sold as a shivcha, by definition, she doesn't have a knas if you sleep with her. And the converse is also true as well. When she's no longer eligible to be sold, by definition, she has a knas. Whereas the line in the sand, it's from the time that she has shtei se'aros. So our Mishnah aligns perfectly with Reb Meir, but not the Chachamim. Let's finish up the Brisa, the 3 lines from the bottom. The Chachamim omrim ketana mi bas shalosh shana v'yom echad ve'ad she'is bager yesh la knas. That's a huge difference. The Chachamim have a span of years that's much wider than Reb Meir. The Chachamim say that they have a knas even when they are ketanim. Says the Gemara, knas in mecher lo. Are we going to say that she can't be sold? We understand that she has a knas, but are you also saying that she can't be sold? In other words, we know that Rav Meir has an inverse relationship between the ability to sell her and whether or not she gets a knas. If it's yes to one, then it's no to the other. Do the Chachamim have the same thing? Says Gemara, no. Ema, turning to the top of Chav Testament base, af knas b'makom mecher. No, he doesn't hold to this inverse relationship between knas and mecher. And really, the Chachamim are of the opinion that even if she gets a knas, she can also be sold. There's no need to have. This requires rishonim. How do we understand Rav Meir? How do we understand the Chachamim? Not for now. The Gemara on the top of Chav Testament base asks a question on our Mishnah. V'hani b'nei knasan inhu. Why would we say that the first few cases in our Mishnah, which was the case of the mamzeres, nesina, and kusis, why would we say that they're b'nei knasa? Ve'amai ikri kan v'lo siyeh li'isha isha haru'uya lo. The only way that we should have a knas is when we're talking about a woman who's ru'uya to you. But these women are not ru'uya. You cannot marry a mamzeres, you cannot marry a nesina, you cannot marry a kusis. One way or the other, there should be no knas for these 3 women in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, answer number 1, Amar Reish Lakish, you're right. On paper, it shouldn't be the case, but we have specific drushas that include these women. Nara ha-na'ara. So this is a drush. You have to look in the psukim to see how all the words play out. Cha legufe. One is to include a regular kosher girl. V'cha le'asui chayve laban. The other is to say that you'll get a knas for sleeping with a girl who's chayve laban. V'cha le'asui chayve krisus. And that is to include, like we saw in the third category of our Mishnah, even cases of chayve krisus, that there would be a knas. The Rav Papa disagrees with the drasha. Amar besula besulos ha besulos. He says it's different words from which we learn these things. One of these words comes to teach us about a kosher girl herself, that if you sleep with her, there's a knas. One is to include chayve lavan. If there's an isser lav, then you're going to get a knas for sleeping with her, and one for kares as well. Why did Rav Papa and Reish Lakish have different drushes? Why did they do that? The results are the same. So obviously it must be that one held that you couldn't use the drush of the other for a technical reason. Says the Gemara, about 10 lines down on Chav Testament base, we're only going to learn about another 15 lines. We'll get a little bit more than halfway down and then we'll stop. The Rav Papa, my time alama Karesh Lakish, Rav Papa, who focused on the words of Besula, Besulos, and Habasulos, why didn't he say like Reish Lakish, who focused on Na'ara, and Ha-Na'ara? Says the Gemara, because he couldn't. The words Na'ara were used already for another drasha. How were they used? Amar Abaye Baleo Mesa Pater. That if a man were to be intimate with a girl for whom really there should be a knas, and then unrelated, the girl dies separately in an accident, not related to the Tashmish Hamita, Pater, he no longer has to pay the knas. How do we know that if he had the Tashmish Hamita, but before he paid the knas, she died, that he's Pater from the knas? You can only pay the father this money, the knas, for sleeping with her, if she's still alive. So therefore, those words are not available for a drasha, the words of Nara, Hana'ara, Nara, and Hana'ara. Therefore, Rav Papa needed to come up with another set of psukim, which was the psukim of Besula, Besulos, and Habasulos. And conversely, Reish Lakish, my time alo amar Rav Papa. Why didn't you say like the opinion of Rav Papa? Says the Gemara, Humi baile l'gzera shava. That we needed the words of Besula, Besulos, and Habasulos for a Gzera Shava. What for? The Tanya, Kesef Yishkol Kimor Habasulos, Sheizeh, Kimor Habasulos, Kimor Habasulos Kazeh. One pasuk speaks about the number of 50, but it only calls it Kesef, doesn't call it Shekel. The other pasuk speaks about Shekel, but not in relation to the 50. We combine the two together. So we needed it for a Gzera Shava from two sugas. Okay, but still, even though they both have a reason for why they don't hold like one another, because according to the opinion of Rav Papa, we needed those words to teach us. We needed that to teach us that a girl who dies, then the father no longer gets the knas. And conversely, Reish Lakish couldn't say like Rav Papa because of the Gzera Shava. But still, Reish Lakish nami mi baile lechada abaye, Rav Papa nami mi baile legzera Shava. Still, at the end of the day, they both still agree with all of the halachos. We're only dealing with the exegetical piece, which pasuk teaches us X, which pasuk teaches us Y. So it's true that we all agree with the halachos, but how do we navigate the drushos? So says the Gemara, it's pretty complex. Ella, says the Gemara, Shisa Kra'e Ksivi. There are 6 psukim that we can darshan from. We have Na'ara, Ha-Na'ara, Besula, Besulos, and Ha-Besulos. Trei legufaihu. 2 of these drashos, the Gemara doesn't detail which. 2 of these drashos are to teach us that a girl who's kasher, who you violate, who you're intimate with, you're obligated to give a knas. One of them is to teach us the din of Abaye, that if the girl dies, then the knas is not paid. To teach us the din that the kesef is 50 shekel. That was the Gzera Shava. And Aisru Leitre, there still are 2 words left over. One to teach us that if a person sleeps with a woman for whom there's a chayve lav, and he'll be chayve knas, and the other is to include a woman for whom intimacy with them is a chiyuv krisus, that he be chayve knas as well. We're going to continue with this sugya tomorrow. Mir Hashem, tomorrow we'll learn Daf Lamed, and then Friday morning Lamed Aleph, Shabbos Lamed Beis, and that will be Sunday's Daf, and then we're caught up. Wishing you all a beautiful night.